So I'd like to just say that I'm so honored to introduce Arthur to all of you, and that we're here to listen to what he has to say. And thank you so much, Arthur, and the whole staff of AEI for inviting us to be here.
Thank you, Richard, and thanks to all of you. I very much appreciate the fact that we have this here at AEI. I'm honored to host you. Although our staff has been telling me it's been a wonderful event, so I haven't been doing it myself, but it's wonderful to lead an institution that can attract so many of you here today. You're in a profession that's not typically thought of as ideological or political, but all of us exist in a political milieu, and we're swimming in these waters of ideology today. I don't have to tell you that it's a pretty tough business out there, and we're all responsible with positions of leadership to spread the values that we hold really dear, and that's what I want to talk about with you today. I want to talk to you a little bit today about what we're finding here in Washington, D.C., and how all of us, people of good conscience, whether we're involved in politics or not directly, can understand the problems facing the United States and how each of us can make it better. That's what I want to talk with you about today. You heard a little bit about, I have an unusual background. I didn't start off as, there's no 6-year-old kid who says, Mommy, when I grow up, I want to be a think tank president, because it doesn't really mean, they all say I want to be a doctor, by the way, or a fireman. And so it was a windy path, and what I really wanted to be when I was a kid is I wanted to be a musician. It's really all I wanted. From the time I was 4 years old, I was playing the violin, and then I played the piano at 5, and at 8 I started the French horn, and I was really good at it, and that's what I wanted to dedicate my life to doing. And I had all these, it's interesting, I had this view in my head that classical music is a tough business. It's sort of like being a physician. You got to work really hard, and you have to be completely dedicated, and you have to go through a lot of penury and pain. But I thought I knew what it would be like to be successful. That would be to play Carnegie Hall. And I knew that if I I grew up in Seattle, Washington. I'd never been east of the Idaho border. So Carnegie Hall was in some Shangri-La, some mythical place. And I remember when it finally came true. I was 21 or 22 years old. I dropped out of college, or dropped out, kicked out, splitting hairs, and the dream kind of unraveled a little bit. I was playing professionally, and I finally made it to Carnegie Hall. And I remember my Carnegie Hall debut. I was walking with my instrument, and my picture was on the sort of the cartel out in front next to the ticket booth. I'm thinking, I made it! I finally made it! And I walked in, I started the concert, and I stepped up to the front of the stage to talk to the audience, to tell them what I was about to play, and I fell off into the audience. And the whole thing was ruined. The whole thing was just ruined. And I remember thinking, maybe this is a sign from God that I'm not supposed to be a French horn player. And I didn't think I was supposed to go, run a think tank or something. But life puts all these weird twists and turns. It kind of went from bad to worse for a few years. I did join the Barcelona Symphony, and I was playing in the Barcelona Symphony, and I was miserable. It sounds cool, right? I was miserable. I mean, the conductor was an evil, evil man, and it was, and I didn't, the lifestyle and the practicing, I was so tired of it, and I remember I would just drag to work every day. But I want to tell you about one thing that I remember overall from that period. And there's one moment that really sunk in. I was at a concert, and we were playing a Beethoven symphony. And I remember thinking, I was just feeling sorry for myself, and I didn't like the job. And then the conductor started the symphony, and we all started playing, and it was pure bliss. Because when you're playing in a symphony orchestra, it's complete human unity. And unity between people, love in musical form, is the secret to happiness. See, this is the thing that I want to impress upon you, because what's driving us crazy in America today and what creates unhappiness and emptiness in our lives is division. And what we seek is unity, is to be together with other people in bonds of love. And I saw that where the connective tissue is great music, but we can get it in any particular way that we want. We need unity. I'm going to talk about this theme here today, and I'm going to talk about it in the context of politics here in a second. But really what I want to impress upon you is I want all of us to ask ourselves, what can I do to be a force for unity between people? Because that's the source of happiness. There's an interesting study that I've been looking at recently. Maybe some of you saw it because it was highlighted in the New York Times. about how connections between people are the most formative, fundamental things that change people's lives. There's a guy named Arthur Aaron, who's a social psychologist, teaches at State University of New York at Stony Brook. And he had this hypothesis that by inducing unity between two strangers, within 45 minutes, he could make them fall in love. Don't believe it, do you? I mean, there had to be people more or less with proclivities to fall in love. I mean, you couldn't have, a 95-year-old guy and it had to be two people more or less who could and of the same age group, okay? And here's how he did his experiment. He would bring them in one by one by one. They didn't know each other. And he would bring them into a conference room from separate doors, and they would sit at a table, and they would ask each other 36 questions of increasing intimacy. Nothing inappropriate. It'd be like, tell me about your relationship with your mother, okay? It's serious stuff. And then at the end of these 36 questions, which took about 40 minutes, then they had to stare into each other's eyes for 4 minutes solid, which is brutal, right? Staring into each other, silently, staring into each other's eyes for 4 minutes. Now, what was he trying to do here? It wasn't just, tell me something about yourself. What he was trying to do is he was trying to stimulate a hormone called oxytocin, which you all know what that is. Oxytocin is the hormone of love and the hormone of attachment. You find it in animals that mate for life, prairie voles and wood storks and these types of animals. And you find it in high prevalence for people who have successful marriages, right? But you can stimulate it with certain kinds of interactions of unity. And that's what he was doing. What did he find? That basically the people in this experiment paired up and started dating. And one of them, at the end of 6 months, got married. And so people have tried this over and over and over again, and what are they finding? This is not really about love. This is about unity between people, and this is about happiness that comes from unity with people. Now, the opposite of this is division. When we elicit division between people, when we pull people apart, we get the greatest unhappiness that people can experience in their lives. The Chapman University out in California has a survey they do every year about what people are afraid of. Okay, and they're afraid of all kinds of stuff. They're afraid of, a bridge collapse and this kind of, but the really interesting things are about your personal future. What are you most afraid of in your personal future, right? What he finds is that a lot of people, about 40% of people say they're afraid of dying, right? Okay. The one thing that they're all more afraid of than dying is loneliness, is being divided from other people. Now, the point I'm trying to bring is in dyads, between individual people, in pairs, in groups, in society, in politics, unity brings happiness. Division brings unhappiness. Do you want to have a happier world? Work for unity. That's what we need to do. Now, what do we see today in American society? We actually have the lowest levels of confidence that we've had in our country that we've had in 40 years. We have the most pessimism about our future, and we have very low levels of aggregate societal happiness. This is stuff that I study. Why is that? It's because we're not united, and we don't have any forces for unity. We're more polarized than we've been in virtually every social and political sphere. There was a paper last year in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, which some of you read, and if you're not reading it regularly, you see articles in PNAS all the time. And there's an article about political motive asymmetry, and it was published in 2014. And basically, political motive asymmetry, for those of you who weren't weren't psychology majors in college, political motive asymmetry is the case in which you think that you're motivated by the good of others, but everybody else is motivated by hatred. You see, it's very common in countries that are suffering from civil war. So you see it in the Balkans, you see it in Israel, Palestine, you see it in all these conflicts. But what they really found dramatically was that in American politics today, most Democrats and most Republicans are suffering from political motive asymmetry, which means I think that, it doesn't matter who I am, I think my politics are motivated by benevolence, but your politics, if you disagree, are motivated by hatred. I think I'm good, but you're evil and out to get me. That's what most people in America think today. That's a huge problem, isn't it? And I know that there's all of you in here that you favor a free enterprise approach to what we're doing. But does that mean that people who disagree with us hate us and are evil? No. Until we can get over that, we're not going to have unity. Until we have unity in this country, we're going to suffer from the same problems that we've got. I want to talk about the secrets for each of us individually to elicit more unity in our work and in our lives, and how I can do it more in the political system as a president of the American Enterprise Institute. That's what my purpose really is in the next little while. Okay, so where do we start? What are the tricks to doing that? Now, by the way, the desire for unity doesn't mean a desire for sameness, does it? I mean, it doesn't mean that I want unity. The easiest way to get unity is to get everybody to agree with you. But that's really not what I'm talking about. Unity means treating people with civility and respect, notwithstanding the fact that they're not the same. Pope Francis, when he was in his Washington, New York trip, before that he was in Cuba. And here's what he said to the Cuban leaders, what he said to Raul Castro. Unity is often confused with uniformity, with actions, feelings, and words which are all identical. This is not unity, it's conformity. Now, that's not the same thing. I mean, it's important that we understand how diversity really what it means. And we want to get along despite physical, religious, racial, and even ideological differences. So that's what I want to talk about here today. How do we build a life of greater unity? Step one. What actually hurts unity the most? When I'm looking at the political system today, people will say that America's never been angrier than it is, right? And there's a lot of anger right there. That's actually not right. The problem that we have in American politics and American discourse is not anger, it's contempt. Contempt is a different phenomenon. Contempt is an expression of disgust for the other. There's a guy, a social psych professor at the University of Washington in Seattle. His name is John Gottman. He's the world's leading expert on marriage reconciliation. And he knows when marriages are going to work and when they aren't. And he has this proof that he has. He'll watch a couple, a silent conversation between a couple. He'll ask them to discuss something of great contention, whether it's money or the kids or whatever. And he says that he can watch it for 10 seconds and say with 94% accuracy whether or not they'll be divorced in the next 5 years. What is he looking for? He's looking for signs, physical signs of contempt. What are they generally? The number one, you know what it is? Eye rolling. Eye rolling. I have 3 teenagers at home. Pray for me. And I see so much eye rolling, you can't believe it. They practically fall over backwards in their chairs. You know, they're rolling their eyes so hard all the time. The problem is when two people are at a symmetric relationship. When two people, spouses, for example, when one shows disgust and contempt with some physical symbol like this, it's almost like a physical attack, one person on the other. It's a sign that it's not just that I don't like you right now. I don't love you and I don't respect you and you disgust me. That's almost the most violent thing that you can do, and it predicts divorce. Now, that's the problem with our political discourse today. It's not about anger and disagreement. It's about contempt. Listen to the President of the United States. Before he gets elected in 2008, he's at a fundraiser in, of course, San Francisco, at, of course, a billionaire's house. And he says, you know the problem with the people in many places like Pennsylvania and Ohio, they just kind of cling to their guns and their religion, right? In other words, he talked about ordinary Americans with tremendous contempt, and he didn't understand why everybody was so angry about it, why everybody reacted so viscerally, because somebody who wants to be president of the United States is talking about them as if they don't deserve any respect. He talked about them with disgust. In 2012, once again at a fundraiser in San Francisco, he said, you know, the problem with Republicans, and again, he's talking about like half the country. It's the president talking about half the country. The problem is that, you know, they don't believe that they believe you should pull yourself up by your bootstraps, even if you don't have boots. Now, I read that and I thought, he's talking about me. He's talking about me with contempt because of my politics, because of my views on free enterprise and earned success and America's role in the world. He's saying I don't care about poor people. I grew up around poor people. I've dedicated my career to eradication of poverty. And that's what he's saying, right? That's contempt. Contempt rules out the possibility of reconciliation. There's a lot of good studies that show that anger ordinarily resolves and reconciles. Contempt never leads to reconciliation. The number one thing that we have to do personally to get greater unity in our country and more unity in our relationships is to stop showing contempt. Okay, now what do you do instead? right? Because this is a reaction. This is a habit that we're in. And the answer is do something instead. What do you do instead of showing contempt? I have a personal friendship and a teacher relationship with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Okay, for years now, I've been working with the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama has come to AEI. We've done conferences with him at his home, his monastery in Dharamsala in the Himalayan foothills. And it's a beautiful friendship and beautiful relationship. And I'm able to ask him these things. So when you feel contempt, what should you do instead? You know what he says? Show warm-heartedness. I know, it sounds really naive. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? Okay. In other words, when you want to be a jerk, just be nice. Simple. Simple, right? Actually, it's not that soft. Think about it. The Dalai Lama, as most of you know, is the spiritual leader of the Tibetan people. He was kicked out of communist China in 1959 and led his people into exile at the age of 16. Right now, this is a guy who doesn't have any experience leading people into exile, and he's at the point of the communist gun, one of the most repressive regimes in the world. Get out, right? And he has to find some place for these people to live, and he's a kid, basically. Now, if you were him, what would you feel about the Chinese? Probably a little contempt, probably a little bit, right? Like bad guys. And if you were the Chinese, what would you think about the Dalai Lama? We kicked him out. They're all poor. The Tibetans are all poor. So he's just going to disappear, right? Wrong. He's a tough hombre. He says that his main weapon is through kindness making his enemies into his friends. He's a tough guy, right? He will tell you warm-heartedness is not for sissies. It's for tough people. He has, over the past 70 years, become, approximately less than that, 50 years and some change, become the most respected religious figure in the world. And on the world stage, representing 6 million poor, in many cases starving Tibetans, standing up to 1.5 billion red Chinese. That's the power of warm-heartedness. And contempt never would have done it. That was his point to me. Do you want to be effective? Do you want to get your point across? And do you want to be a good person at the same time? These are not orthogonal concepts. On the contrary, warm-heartedness gets that done. It's an extraordinary thing, and he's a great example of that. So let's think about exactly how we do that. You know, it's funny. I had this discovery of this several years ago, by the way. I was, when I was teaching at Syracuse, I taught at Syracuse for a long time. I was a college professor for 10 years between playing the French horn and coming to AEI. And I did what typical college professors do. I did research that nobody ever reads. And I was obscure and happy and working in my office every afternoon. And I've written lots of books, 5 books or something that had no readers, and because they were boring. And at one point, my 6th book accidentally got really famous. It was one of these weird things, right? I wrote it, it was about charitable giving, and I observed in the book that conservatives give a lot more to charity than liberals do. And, I was just looking at the data, and it went boom, and a week after the book came out, I was on Rush Limbaugh's radio show, to the great consternation of my friends in the faculty lounge, I assure you. And I was, and suddenly, I'm on a radio and TV, and the book was selling like 1,000 copies a day. It changed my life overnight. It completely changed my life. And it was about 2 weeks in, I was getting tons of emails, because my email was really easy to get, because I was a college professor, I was right on the website, and I was getting hundreds of messages, interesting book, terrible book, a lot of love mail and hate mail and the whole thing. And I get this one email, I remember, it had a fundamental impact on me. It was the lesson from the Dalai Lama by accident. I get an email from a guy in Texas, and it starts off, "Dear Professor Brooks, you are a right-wing fraud," which is pretty unpromising, I thought, right? But I kept reading, and I'm reading down the email, all the way down the email, and it's thousands of words long. So it's going to take me 15 minutes to read this email, and I'm halfway through the email, and I realize that he's refuting my book in chapter and verse, and this is a very technical, empirical book. I'm an economist, and he's saying, table 3 is all wrong, and your conclusions in chapter 4 are backwards, and he's refuting everything. And I get halfway through the email, and what I'm thinking? I'm not thinking this jerk, this idiot. No, I'm thinking, he read my book, right? So I decided to thank him. Crazy, I know, and it's like, but it's what was going through my heart. And so I wrote back to him and I said, dear so-and-so, I could tell you, I could argue with you on every single point, and I think you're wrong. And, I just got to tell you, it took me 2 years to write that book. And I didn't think anybody was going to read it. And I got your email, and I'm just really grateful to you for taking the time to read it. And that's just all I want to say. Send, right? And I go back to work. 15 minutes later, the response comes back from him. And it's like, if you're ever in Dallas and want to get dinner, right? And I thought, power. Holy cow. It's like I dug up gold in my backyard by accident or something. That's what the Dalai Lama's talking about. You can go the easy way, you can go for division, or you can choose unity through civility and respect, and love and solidarity and brotherhood. You choose. See, it's up to us. We get to choose these things. Okay, so I'm talking about this with a bunch of congressmen last month. And one of them says, sounds great. How? I don't feel love. I don't feel warm-heartedness. I don't feel it. How do I do this? And there's an answer. You know what the answer is? Fake it. Fake it. So, and I want to tell you how. There was a French physiologist in the late 19th century by the name of Duchenne. And Duchenne had one career achievement, which was cataloging the human smile. Right? I mean, you could get tenure for anything back then too, apparently. So, and he's working on cataloging the human smile. What he found out was he was traveling to Papua New Guinea and Switzerland and Japan. He found out that there are 19 types of human smiles. It's not cultural. It's physiological, which is pretty interesting, isn't it? You'd think that people would, but it's about the musculature of the face and the workings of the brain. And 19, okay, that's not the interesting part. Here's the interesting part. 18 of them are not associated with happiness. Only one smile is associated with happiness, and it's called the Duchenne smile. He's like, I want that one with my name on it, right? So what is the Duchenne smile? How do you recognize when somebody's smiling if they're actually happy to see you, right? I mean, it's not like that the flight attendant smile, No, you don't look at the mouth. You look at the eyes. See, there's two muscles that go from the corner of your eyes to the bottom. You've studied this in your physiology classes. They're called the orbicularis oculi muscles. Yeah, you've seen this, right? And you know this better than I do, so I say this with appropriate humility. The orbicularis oculi muscles are heavily activated in the Duchenne smile, mostly involuntarily. That's the reason it's hard to fake it if you're actually happy. And we have the onboard hardware in the human brain to recognize the contraction of the orbicularis oculi muscles, and so you know when the person you're looking at is happy to see you. Okay, now go forward 100 years in about 1994, when a bunch of social psychologists were asking this. See, we were learning in the 1990s that there's a lot of reverse causation between physiology and emotion. So for the longest time, people thought that you do things when you feel them. But we're learning back in the 1990s, that when you do certain things, your brain will be signaled that you must feel something, and it'll change your emotions. So this is, by the way, when a lot of psychiatrists were working in behavioral therapy for the people who were really depressed, and not just giving them lithium and the antidepressants that were common in the 1990s with early Prozacs and stuff like that. They were starting to say, you know what you need to do also? You need to pretend you're happy. Why? I mean, what does a happy person do? Doesn't stay in his pajamas all day, right? Goes out of the house, talks to people, right? Pretend, I know you're miserable, pretend you're happy, right? Why? Because they were starting to find a lot of evidence that would actually change the activity in the medial prefrontal cortex, that would illuminate the part of the brain that's associated with greater happiness. Good stuff, right? Okay, so these guys in the 1990s are looking at the Duchenne literature from 100 years before. They said, I wonder what would happen if we asked people to stimulate the orbicularis oculi muscles, whether they would start feeling happier. Reverse causation, right? So what they did is they took a bunch of undergraduate students, which you always do because they're cheap and they'll do anything. And if you can get it past internal review, and they had half of them do something in a control group. In the treatment group, they would scrunch up the orbicularis oculi muscles for 20 seconds, right? And then they would monitor their levels of affect, of positive affect. What do they find? Do that for 20 seconds. You're happier for an hour. Now, this is good advice, by the way, just as a side note. Do that in the morning. Do that. I'm going to give you a hint about that in just a little while, as a matter of fact, because this is helpful life advice. Okay, but the main takeaway from this is fake it. Pretend you're warm-hearted. Pretend you're happy. Pretend you have a sense of brotherhood and solidarity, even if you don't, and then you will. That's what it comes down to. Act like you want to be. Now, I ran that by the Dalai Lama, and he said, duh. We've known that for 2,000 years in Buddhism. Like there you are. Everything was invented first in Buddhism, it turns out. Okay. So, and by the way, does that mean giving in on your beliefs? No. The Dalai Lama never gave in on his beliefs. And neither should you. Fight for free enterprise. More on that in a second. But do it with civility and respect. Okay, so acting like a good person when you don't want to. That's level 1 unity building. Now let's talk about level 2 unity building, if you want to take this to a higher level of abstraction, but also excellence. What can you do? There's probably the greatest intellectual in the Roman Catholic Church in the United States until recently was the cardinal in Chicago, Archbishop of the Archdiocese of Chicago, Cardinal Francis George. Those of you who are Catholics, you'll know who that is. Those of you who aren't, it doesn't matter. He was a really great thinker and a close friend of Pope John Paul II. He just died of cancer, the reason I say that he was a former great intellectual. And Cardinal Francis George, I was listening to him giving a speech one time. It was a fundraiser, and he was a prodigious fundraiser. He raised tons of money. And so that's very interesting to me because I'm the president of AEI, and I'm asking people for money all the time. This is like the first time I haven't asked people for money in weeks, as you here right now. And I might just slip into it, so forgive me. He's giving a fundraising pitch to his poverty donors. People are going to pay for his big poverty programs. And so I'm keenly aware, how is he going to pitch this? And he says to them, the poor, they need you to pull them out of poverty. But you know what else? You need the poor to pull you out of hell. And I thought, I'm not going to use that, right? But what really impressed me about that, you know what impressed me about that? It made me remember something. We have to need everybody if we want unity. The secret to unity is not helping people. The secret to unity is needing people. That's level 2 unity. And that's a really hard thing to do. Ask yourself this. Do you think we need the poor? It's a historical question, by the way. Many of you descended from immigrants. Some of you are immigrants. And if you're descended from immigrants within the last 2 or 3 generations, ask yourself this. Did my parents or grandparents come to America for a better system of forced income redistribution? Probably not so much. Steaming in toward Ellis Island saying, it's going to be great to get welfare. No, that's not what they were thinking, right? They were here because there was something for them to do, because they were needed here. Like there's a poem, a famous poem on the base of the Statue of Liberty, right? Part of it says, give us your poor. That meant something. This country was built on the backs of poor people. My great-grandparents came here literally through Ellis Island with nothing. They were first-grade education, orphans, illiterate, wrong religion. They were here because the country needed them to do something. The greatest, most aspirational leaders, somebody that we revere a lot, as I do as a political conservative, is of course Ronald Reagan. I remember Ronald Reagan when I was a kid. It was in high school when Ronald Reagan was running for president. I couldn't vote. And I heard, because we're going to Seattle, that if Reagan gets elected, Granny's going to get thrown out in the snow and America's going to be forced into a war or something, right? But I remember listening to him on TV and thinking, he needs me. That was his magic. He needs me to work and to earn and to succeed. We've lost that, haven't we? Now, maybe that's a moral problem, but that's also a highly practical problem. Let me tell you who knows when they're needed. The poor know when they're needed. I have this friend. His name is Richard Norat. He's until recently, he was in prison. He got out of prison after 22 years. He was in prison from the age of 18 to the age of 40 because he killed somebody when he was 18 years old. Okay, and it's funny when you talk to. We work with people who are incarcerated. When you talk to people who've been in prison for a long time, they're like kids because their development stops. And so he gets out of prison at 40. He's never had a girlfriend. He doesn't know how to use a cell phone. He's never had a job. He doesn't know how to drive a car. He's got to learn everything. I see him a week, and he's homeless too, by the way, because a lot of these guys get out of prison, they're homeless. And he's just joined this homeless shelter. It's a homeless program in New York that we're doing a lot of work with called the Doe Fund. And the Doe Fund has its entire concept based on earned success through work, the dignity and potential that you get from actually working for a living. And by the way, nobody treats ex-cons like that. Everybody treats them as maybe people who need help, but definitely people to be avoided. Right? But if you say, actually, we need them to do stuff. He just joined a week before he'd come in. I said, how do you think it's going to go? And he said, I don't know. I'm just going to work. I see him a year later. He starts off sweeping the streets, and then he goes on to a minimum wage job working for an exterminator. Okay, now, that is, in the voice of elites, us, a dead-end job. Minimum wage job, semi-skilled, sort of non-skilled. We talk about dead-end jobs all the time. And I said, how's it going? Richard, how's it going? And he said, let me show you something. He pulls out an iPhone. He's got an iPhone, which is not the secret to happiness, but it's pretty cool. It's an email from his boss. And it says, Richard, emergency bedbug job, East 65th Street. I need you now. And I said, so? He says, read it again. I need you now. Nobody's ever said that to me in my life. That was the secret to his happiness. That was the secret to his success. And his boss didn't mean anything. It was like he literally needed him to come and spray some bed bugs. But it was, I need you now, is the secret. Do we need people or not? Okay. That's in poverty, and we're doing work on this. God bless you. There's a lot of work we're doing on that here. But now let me take it back to politics. There are a lot of people you disagree with. Do you need the people you disagree with? Listen to the presidential candidates. Listen to them. They're telling their side, we don't need the other side. That's a grave practical and moral error. And let me tell you why it's actually factually wrong. From 1970 till today, the percentage of the world's population living on $1 a day or less around the world has decreased by 80%. Most of you didn't know that. Okay? There's been an 80% decline in the world's worst poverty since I was a kid. Okay, now, what did that? 2 words, free enterprise. That's what did that. It was free trade and globalization and property rights and the rule of law in the American entrepreneurial system spreading around the world after 1970 that pulled 2 billion of your brothers and sisters out of poverty for the first time in human history. You who are warriors for free enterprise are warriors for the poor. That's a fact. Okay? Now, fact 1. They were the easiest people to pull out of poverty. We want to get the next 2 billion people out of poverty, right? Because there's still a lot of people living and they're poor. They're the hard cases. Those are the cases where we have to work harder to push the principles of free enterprise into these communities. What's that going to take? That's going to take 2 obsessions working side by side. Poverty and markets. That's what we have to do. Now, who has an obsession with poverty? Progressives. I would like to say that conservatives have an equal obsession with poverty, but they don't. They don't. According to Jonathan Haidt, a psych professor at New York University, a very close friend of mine, somebody I've worked with a lot, he's done work on morality and the opinions of conservatives and liberals. Liberals are 59% more likely to care about poverty than free markets. Conservatives are 28% more likely to care about free markets than they are about poverty. Okay? I can wish that my side cared about poverty as much as the left, but we don't. Okay? So what does that mean to get the next 2 billion people out of poverty? I need the left, and we need to work together to do something that's truly, desperately needed and important around the world. That's why we need each other. And that is level 2 unity. If you want to be a change agent, a transformational purpose, don't give an inch on your values and on your ideology. Because you're a free marketeer, and that's right, by the way. But remember that we need people who are not like us. Diversity, ideological diversity, religious diversity, political, social, racial diversity, that's our strength because we actually need each other. It's highly practical and highly moral. And we can be the ones, particularly those of us who are political conservatives, which is a lot of you, who can embrace this and bring us into a new world understanding that. That's level 2 unity. There's none of that going on in politics today. None of it. There will be a flight to that, and they're going to end up back here at AEI. And we're going to be talking about that. But each one of you is in a leadership position. You're going to have unusual leadership. Everybody loves their doctor, right? I mean, it's amazing when somebody's taking care of your health, what a leadership position that is. What can you do to bring people together? What can you do to avoid division? That's the question to ask yourself. And I'm leaving you with basically 3 suggestions, 3 secrets. Number 1, avoid contempt. Number 2, replace it with warm-heartedness. Number 3, move from helping people to needing people. If we can do that, then the world is ours. The future is ours, and the world is going to be happier. I appreciate the fact that you're here and you're thinking about public policy, and this little side trip into ethics, I hope it's been useful to you. But for what you're going to do with your careers, the values that you display, the fact that you're working for the free market system that's lifting up the people around the world as you go from your day-to-day work and making my country and my world better, my last words are, thank you. Thanks. And we have some time for Q&A, correct? We're good for Q&A. I do, absolutely. I think we have until the top of the hour. Okay. We got 15 minutes. So I'd love to hear what's on your mind. We got mics, and so I'd love to know your name and where you're in school and where you're from, and anything else you want to tell me.
Okay. Do you mind if I ask the first question?
Please do.
Because I have the mics? Okay.
It's the microphone prerogative.
Yeah. My name is Joe McKinney, and I really love Hyatt's book. But it sort of goes back to the question comparing unity normally, like voluntary unity, like in a symphony, versus involuntary unity, such as a state.
Right.
And I think maybe it's not analogous, especially with Hyatt's proposal, which is liberals and conservatives have different moral matrices. Mm-hmm. It's close to impossible to have unity with a group that has different end goals in mind. And that sort of leads to the contempt you were talking about earlier. So is unity a good goal? I mean, it's sort of the Orwellian strength through unity sort of problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So unity is not the only goal, but it is a good goal. And let me tell you how we can do it when we come from a different moral framework. So the research is very clear that the different moral frameworks between left and right come down to 5 different dimensions. Okay? The interesting thing is that conservatives and liberals share 2 dimensions of morality, and that conservatives have 3 extra dimensions of morality. So it is not to say that the right is more moral than the left, but the right has more morals than the left, has kind of more of a varied moral palette than the left does. The 2 things that we have in common, 100% of Americans have in common that we value morally, are compassion and fairness. Now, we don't define it the same way, right? We don't define it the same way. I mean, fairness largely on the left is defined by a finish line that's the same, and on the right is defined by a starting line that's the same. It's a meritocratic fairness idea on the right, and it's a distributional fairness system on the left. But we all want fairness, and we all have compassion. Now, the right has other things that we talk about: the morality of authority, the morality of purity in lots of matters. And so basically when people talk about, it's funny, you say to conservatives, is it moral to desecrate the flag? And conservatives will say it's treason. Right? It's funny, a congressman told me that one time. I was doing a Rorschach test, and I say, tell me the first thing that comes into your mind when I say flag burning, and he says treason, right? So I called my brother, my older brother, who's a total lefty, and I said, so what comes into your mind the first thing when I say flag burning? And he says, inadvisable, right? So, it's kind of, and so there are differences to be sure, but basically when we focus on the areas in which we have commonality, then we can adjudicate the differences within the context of civility and respect. See, this is the key thing to keep in mind. If you want to get along with somebody, start off with your common objectives and move on later to your differences. If you want to get nothing done, start off with your differences, and you won't get to the areas where you have common objectives. See, this is the biggest problem that we have today. Unity is not the only goal, but unity is a really good goal, and unity from the moral framework as opposed to the actual policies. This is interesting from the political science literature. When you have people with differing ideologies, they can actually get along and work together only if there's a moral consensus at the middle of it. The American moral consensus is pushing opportunity down to the people who need it the most. Okay? That's a fair, there's a lot to that, but the problem is when that moral consensus collapses, then ideologies hit each other head on, and what should be a competition of ideas becomes a holy war of ideologies. And that's what we see. So our job is not to say, yeah, a little bit of left, a little bit of right, it's all good, because that's not right. Our job is to say, here's what I propose as the moral consensus. And have the other side say, yeah, I agree, that's a better society. Now let's compete on ideas. Because a flexible ideology is not one where you give on your ideology, but one where you're working on either side to get the same thing. So that's basically what I'm talking about. Thank you. Thank you for that excellent question. Who's next? You're the boss.
Over here.
Okay, you got the mic.
Hi.
Hi.
Danny McCory. I'm
Hi,
from
Danny.
Grand Rapids, Michigan.
It's a good place.
Georgetown Med School.
Uh-huh.
So I'm thinking about the role of social media and how pervasive it is, and basically putting a megaphone into the most contemptuous people.
Yep.
I'm wondering if you could speak to how you might utilize that for unity, or if maybe the best way is to avoid it altogether, what the role is with that.
It's a beautiful question. I appreciate it very much. What is the role of social media? Now, there is a literature that's very interesting. It's related to, the literature is actually about internet commenting, which is the same kind of phenomenon, right? So it's just one study where there was an article in a big news website that it was an optical illusion about whether or not two things were the same length. You've seen these things before, right? And it looks like they're not, but they actually are. Right? And what they're monitoring the comments that were coming in, all anonymous comments coming in underneath. And by about the fifth comment, it was racist. Right? It's an optical illusion. What do you but it's like, no, it's not. You're an idiot. So you're not just an idiot. And it escalates into like racial invective. It's the craziest thing. Why is that? Two reasons. Number one, it's anonymous. Number two, anonymous fora are dominated by people with sociopathic characteristics. So there's a very interesting study that actually shows that sociopathy is best expressed in these anonymous forums. And by the way, for those of you who are still single, which is a lot of you, ask this simple question on a first date. Do you like to comment on news websites? Because if the answer is yes, blinking light, right? Okay. And Twitter is classic on that. You say, nobody knows who you are. Nobody knows. And so the two things that we can do, well, number one is if you're going to participate, you better have a thick skin. When I read a column from the New York Times. And my editor, the first thing he says is, let me give you a piece of advice as a right-winger at the New York Times, right? I said, what? He says, don't read the comments. This is my editor telling me not to read the comments. You have to have a very thick skin if you're going to participate in this kind of forum. You can't take things personally because nothing's personal. It's crazy land. And if you can't do that, then the answer is turn it off. Then, if you are going to participate, then the question is, what is your social goal? To be right or to be good, right? What's your social goal? Now, it's nice when being right and good are the same thing, but if you got to choose, which are you going to choose? That's your moral dilemma. I know which one I choose. I know which one I want to choose. And that's how I think that's the right criteria. There's people who are just too sensitive a soul to be on social media, right? I mean, my wife doesn't spend any time on social media because it's really boring. I have one son who's on it all the time and one son who isn't. And by the way, we have a rule at my house that my kids can't Google me because they're going to find out that people wish I were dead or something. But so I think that's actually how we think about it. How can you use a sociopathic medium as a way to, an inherently sociopathic medium as an empirical matter, as a way to proliferate the forces of solidarity and brotherhood and good? And that takes some creativity. And it takes some strength. Yeah. Right here, and then we'll go back and come back over. Yeah.
Is this thing on?
It's on.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Quite an inspiring talk.
Thank you.
My name is Adi Siegel, and I'm from New York. So this is going to sound kind of pretentious, but
It's okay. I can take it.
how do you deal with stupid people? And those could be people who actually are not educated and people who are very educated,
Yeah.
both of whom I think fall into a category of stupid.
So, okay. Now, to begin with, stupid. I mean, we have to be careful with contempt to begin with, right? Because saying stupid, I mean, you're saying it in jest, but when we actually would say that and we're serious, then there's contempt, and we're on the wrong path already. Okay, here's how to think about the audience for our message. Okay, and it's whatever message. It doesn't matter if you're selling Velveeta cheese or the free enterprise system or Buddhism, right? It doesn't matter. There are 4 orientations toward that message: true believers, persuadables, hostiles, and apathetics. Okay? Those are the 4 audiences. And everybody's in one basket, and they can't be in 2. They can move between them, but they can't be in 2. Okay. The key thing to remember is that you don't talk the same way to everybody. I do a lot of speeches I did 179 speeches last year, right? And this is the first time I've given this talk, and it's going to get better. But, when I'm talking to the Tea Party patriots of the 3-cornered hat or, some weird thing, and I go up and it's just, people with signs and they're dressed up like Minutemen and the whole deal. I'm going to give a different talk than when I'm at the TED conference, right? Which is this overwhelmingly left-wing scene. Why? Because the first group are true believers and the second group are hostiles. And I want to win everybody. I want to win people to our message who are informed and who are uninformed and who are hateful and who are loving. And the way that I'm going to do that depends on who they are. So it's the approach really, really matters a whole lot. So here's the first thing to do. Number 1 is to have love in your heart for the person you're talking to. There's a great book. It has a terrible title. And you've seen it before, but you haven't read it because it looks so terrible. It's called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Right? It's a beautiful book. It was written in the 1920s. It's a beautiful book. Why? Because it's not a book about bending people to your will like it sounds. No. It's a book about how to live an ethical life and how to be good to other people. That's really what it's about. I mean, it's like secretly sending ethics to people. And it's like, you're going to get ahead if you're a good guy, is what it comes down to. Okay, so he tells this story. He tells a story about looking for the most successful people in America. He's in New York, and it's the 1920s, and he's on Broadway, and he sees this magician named Howard Thurston. And Howard Thurston was the most successful magician of his age. I mean, it was like, he had been 40 years dominated. He was on Broadway. In those days, it wasn't lavish musicals. It was variety acts on Broadway. And so he goes to see Howard Thurston, and he'd been doing the same tricks for decades, card tricks and rabbits and the whole thing. And he said it was like it was his first night. He was just ebullient, and he was happy, and he was laughing, and the people were clapping. And so he goes back afterward to Howard Thurston's dressing room and says, "What's your secret? How did you connect with those people?" Because, he's a New Yorker like you, and you see these rubes from the heartland, and you go, "Oh, brother, let's get this suckers," right? No, he was into them, right? What's your secret? He says, "Oh, simple. Every night before I go out, I'm in my dressing room, I say to myself, I am truly grateful for the people in those seats who make it possible for me to make my living doing something I love." Huh? He doesn't say to them, and then he goes out, and he's thankful. Again, fake it is what it comes down to. Now, here's the key thing for us. There are people who are a little stupid, and there are people who are a lot hostile, and there are people who just don't get it, right? You got nothing to say if those people don't need you. It's amazing. When I go I'm in front of hostile crowds all the time. I'm so grateful for the people that are listening to me. I got this megaphone. I get to talk to these people, and they're hostile. God bless those people. I'm actually grateful for them, but I have to remind myself I'm grateful for them. You want to know how to deal with stupid people? Thank God for those stupid people, because they make it possible for you to do something that you really love and something that's really important for humanity and that completes you and makes you fully alive. Yes, sir.
Hello. Thanks a lot, Arthur. I really, really enjoyed what you had to say about unity. My question is, how do we find the unity that we seek when in a two-party political system where the last 10 years we've seen more polarized political beliefs than we've ever had before, and we can't even find unity within one political party, like in the Republican Party? How do we find this unity on a larger scale?
So that's a good question. The first thing to keep in mind is that Democrats are not ISIS, right? And and it sounds weird, right? But you talk to a lot of Republicans and they sort of forget that. Or if I'm in a bunch of Democrats, I say, remember, the Republicans are not Al-Qaeda. This is still one country. It's actually not that, when we're in a war, the Democrats and Republicans sort of weirdly get along. Why is that? It's funny. I mean, I was talking to this cab driver one time. He was from, I said, where are you from? He said, I'm from Eritrea. Right? Eritrea was in a huge civil war when Ethiopia split into two parts and they were killing each other, right? And I said, do you get along with the Ethiopians? He said, oh yeah, it's like brothers. And I said, well, what would happen if you were back home? He said, we'd be killing each other. Right? So the point is there was a common purpose when they were here, right? My wife's from Barcelona. And I tell you, when she's in Barcelona, they don't get along with the people from Madrid. But when they're here, it's like they grew up together, right? Because they're all Spanish when they're here. It's a weird thing, but here's my broader point. We really are all brothers and sisters. And that's the key thing to keep in mind. Now, how do we get to that? Because we've forgotten it, and this is your key point. How do we get to that? Visionary, aspirational leadership. That's what it always does. When you have a company that's fragmented, a corporation that's fragmented, where people are polarized, they're not getting along, and it's really political, and you've been in places like this, you've been in schools like this, and you've been in workplaces like this, what's the boss's job? To bring people together. That's the boss's key job. A bunch of you are going to be entrepreneurs. You're going to run your practices, at least unless you are commodified hopelessly by Obamacare forever. But let's just say that doesn't happen. Okay, and you're going to run these practices, and you're going to have now you don't want to be physicians, but you're going to be human resource directors too. Bringing people together in unity is going to be the goal. How do you do that? You do that with a sense of aspiration. The reason that conservatives really like Reagan is the Reagan magic, which is not just fighting against taxes and debt and deficits and spending in the Soviet Union. The real thing that Reagan did was to bring people together. Remember the cognition that I had when I was 16 years old. He needs me. Maybe he loves me. That's what brought Americans back together, to say we're all Americans. The reason that Obama won in 2008, and he deserved to win in 2008, whether you voted for him or not, he ran a great campaign, is because he campaigned on unity and optimism. Now, the disappointment is that we've had 7 years of division and pessimism, right? And you can say that's bad executive leadership or obstruction, or reasonable people disagree on that. I have my views, and so do you. But the point is, if he had governed that way, we could have gotten beyond that. Leadership is the only solution to pessimism and division and polarization. And it has to be based on these humanistic values, is the way that comes down. Remembering at its core that when we're talking about the United States, we're just one people. That's what it really is. And the enemy is not living within and just having a different political party. It's a tough thing to remember. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Faith Njoku. I'm coming from UCI in California.
Hi, Faith.
Hi. I just wanted to thank you for your talk. That was very inspiring, very moving.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to ask now, as medical students, pre-med students, MPHs, how can we take what you're saying and help, those that live in underserved areas? How do we build a more happier nation in that sense? What can we do, in your advice? Are there any facets to building a happier America that we have control of right now?
Thank you. It gets to, there's a lot of practical stuff, to be sure, Faith, and I appreciate your question a lot. There's a lot of practical things that we can do. One of those things is actually Pope Francis always says this. The advice he always gives to priests, you know what it is? He says, pastors should smell like the sheep. What does that mean? That means, it doesn't mean that, poor people smell bad. That's not what I mean, right? He means that priests should go among the sheep and live with them. And he's going to know whether they're good priests or not because they smell like the sheep. They're in it. They're in it, right? It's easy for us to not be in it, right? It's easier for us to talk about poverty, right? go there. You know, this is where it gets interesting. You know, you're going to be doctors, and doctors make money and have prestige and are leaders. And it's very easy to not go where people are not needed, where people are largely superfluous. Principle number one is to smell like the sheep. Right? And I don't know what that means for you. I don't know what that means for you. I kind of know what it means for me, right? I mean, I think, and I'm working on it. I'm working on it a lot. Right? But each one of us has to remember exactly what this means. And that, by the way, is cosmic unity, because it's seeing this inseparability. You know, my wife's a very strong Christian, and when our car is at an intersection where we live, it's like all the homeless people see the car coming and they run to the car, right? Because it's a rolling food pantry. And she's always got food in the car to get the boy. Because you shouldn't give them money, because that's like giving homeless people drugs. And all of you have done enough public health to understand that. But you should give them, if you want to give them something, food, right? So one time my wife gave a homeless guy a whole pie after Thanksgiving. It's like, thank you. It's a whole pie. Thank you, ma'am. One time it's so inconvenient, because like passing out the salami sticks and the whole thing. I said, can't we just not do this? And she said, no, that woman is me, right? And that's the ethos, is to remember that they are you and we are them. That's cosmic unity. And it's a really hard thing to achieve. It's a really super hard thing to achieve. I am Bernie Sanders. I can't believe I said it, right? It's a really hard thing to say. Okay, so that's right. That's number one. Number two is remembering, when we're trying to design programs and things that we do, that doesn't help people, but that actually, as I said before, that needs people. How do we do that, right? We're trying to build anti-poverty programs and criminal justice reform programs and education reform programs at AEI that make everybody necessary. That's a frontier in medicine that we don't understand very well, is it? I mean, it's us who are experts and doctors and public health professionals and people who have a lot of knowledge, and them, the sick, the poor, the people who are underserved, right? Now, how do we make them necessary? How do we create communities in which people are actually helping each other? That's a frontier of knowledge and of practice that we've barely been able to scratch the surface of. And we need social entrepreneurs who are experts who can take us there. And that's you, Faith. Who's next? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Dan Milyovsky. I'm from New York City, and I'm a first-year med student in Stony Brook. I was involved in libertarian activism in undergrad, but then I actually sort of got tired of the kind of arguments you had with the other side, because I felt it was like the same talking points over and over.
Boring.
And like instead of like an actual discussion, it was just like, all right, like these are the arguments that I like read on the internet, like let me cite them to you. But my question to you is, you were saying how the left and the right need to work together to fight poverty abroad. But if the left sort of fundamentally rejects free markets, and free markets are the way to lift people out of poverty, then how can the left be useful in fighting poverty?
The key thing is, again, it's the unity between right and left. I mean, if you have, we have the idea. See, here's the problem. We actually know what helps poor people, but not enough people on our side care about poor people. They care about poor people, but they don't know how to wipe out poverty. That's my point, is that we need to work together. You're asking what happens if we don't work together? What happens if we can't work together? And then we're in the status quo. That's the conundrum in which we currently find ourselves. And that's the reason, by the way, that we back up the argument not to say, you idiots, capitalism works, but rather to say, you know what, I know what you care about. I know what you care about. I'm going to propose a really good way of getting that. And then we've got a fighting chance. You don't need every liberal. You need some. You need some. I mean, if you want to win an election and you're currently losing by 4 percentage points, you don't need to get the whole of the side. You need to get 5 percentage points of the other side to agree with you. If we want to make real progress, we get the other, and the way that you do that is by starting off by talking about their objectives. Again, this is another one of Dale Carnegie's points in How to Win Friends and Influence People. I'm using it 2 times. This is crazy. And he says, take an honest interest in the other person. Right? If we actually understand, and this is key, we do this a lot. We assume that the other side has bad motives. Right? How many times have I heard that the problem with Obama is he wants to make people permanently subjugated and dependent on the state so that they'll vote for Democrats forever? I've heard it 1,000,000 times. I've met him. It's not true. It's not true. And how many times have I heard those guys say about me or about us that all we want is to cut taxes for our billionaire buddies in the Koch brothers network? I don't care about rich people's tax. I don't care. That's not my point. I mean, I care about everybody's tax. I care about more freedom. I care about people living better lives, right? But the idea that I just want rich people to pay less taxes because they're my friends, or, it's weird how we do this. Stop doing that. Stop with the ad hominem and actually attribute the best motives to the other side, which are usually, by the way, the right motives, and then say, I got a better way to do it, and watch people start to come to you. That's the best way to do it. And are you going to be successful? Sometimes. And sometimes you're not. But that's the reason that it's fun and interesting, is to be on that journey. Thanks. Who's next? It looks like we've got one here. Got one here, and then we'll wrap.
Hi, I'm Jared Rhodes from Dartmouth. I wanted to ask, there are a lot of people out there to build relationships with, a lot of audiences to reach out to. How do you go about selecting who? I mean, there are more people than you could probably reach in or even attempt to reach in a long time. So how do you pick who to work with? What signs, what things do you look for?
It's a good question. And we think about that a lot at AEI because, we're miniature. We're a $40 million organization, which sounds like a lot of money, except that, we're 225 soldiers. That's not a huge army. So what do we do? And the answer is you lead leaders and you use the principle of leverage, because leaders have followers. So it'd be crazy for us to try to influence 40% of the American population. Mass market for AEI, our concepts are pretty esoteric. I mean, this is pretty technical stuff. I have 75 full-time scholars. They're PhD scholars, right? And so they don't know how to talk to the humans very well a lot of times. I mean, it's like, and I'm one of them. I got it. It's like talking to the humans. That's crazy stuff, right? So mass market for us is the whole 1.5% of the population that has leadership positions. Why? This is, by the way, my friends, this is leverage for me. Because you're going to go into these big, important careers and you're going to touch a lot of people. And if I do my job, you're going to remember 5 or 6 words that I said today, and you're going to be better physicians and better people and happier people, and you're going to spread that love. That's leverage for me. And so that's where you find. You go to the places where the leaders are. We have 5 leader groups in the AEI network. Political leaders, business leaders, media leaders, academic leaders, and community leaders. And now today there's 5.5, which is medical leaders, okay? And so of those 5 groups, then there are 4 orientations, which I told you about before: true believers, persuadables, hostiles, and apathetics. That's a 5x4 matrix, right? That's 20 cells. And that's a communications approach in each one of those 20 cells. And I mostly marginalize the apathetics because that's the 98.5% of the population that are going to have a hard time resonating with my work. And by the way, I'm torturing myself to figure out how to make fewer people apathetics and drag them into the persuadable category, so then I can address them in a particular way. And each one of us that has a message has to figure out our matrix. Who am I trying to lead, and what are their orientations toward this message, and what am I going to put in each one of these cells? The biggest mistake that we make in communications in the world that I live in is we have the wrong communications message in the wrong cell. So I get in front of a bunch of liberals and I say, everybody knows that capitalism is best, and I'm cooked. I'm done. I mean, it's idiotic there, right? And so that's where it comes down, and that's how we ought to think about it. I know you got to go on to other stuff. I'm really grateful for you being here, and God bless you.